You know, the thing I hate most about this is the lag time of it popping up. That right there. There it is. Good morning, Facebook.
Good morning, Facebook, and good morning, Jamaica.
Good morning, Shawn.
How you doing today?
It's Monday, and I'm feeling the Mondayness of Monday.
Yeah, I'm looking at my reflection right now in this video. Yeah, I look tired. I'm tired.
Ah,
How y'all doing out there today?
yes. Good morning, Facebook land. Good morning to those that are tuning in. Good morning or good afternoon to those that will watch us later. This is Monday Morning Live, all of us style, with Shawn Young and Jamaica Miles. And today, because we always enjoy having the deepest of topics, we're going to be talking about community violence, policing, and the reality of our task force initiatives that are taking place in the greater capital region: Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Saratoga, and what the mayors and police chiefs in those areas are doing. And I think we'll see quite nicely how the three are connected. So, we're gonna start with community violence. It's a thing, and it's happening a lot. Um, there are way too many shootings, and one shooting is too many shootings,
Yeah,
and they are
yeah.
happening in our poorest communities, in our Black and Brown communities. And the first thing I'm gonna say this morning is there's no such thing as Black on Black crime, because there's been a number of those comments on posts on our page and
Yeah.
on different videos. And why aren't you all talking about Black on Black crime? Because that's just not a real thing. That's just another way to call Black people animals and pretend like there's not white on white crime and that it's not an issue of proximity.
Yeah, exactly. It's another like race baiting or coded way of actually saying, of what we've been saying or what the society has been saying about our community historically is that somehow we are different, somehow we are essentially bad, and that we need to be controlled by the police in some way. Crimes of proximity happens in every culture, every quote unquote race commit crimes against those who are close or near them as opposed to those who are not. So that's just, that's a myth, a racist myth. That's perpetuated both in many cultures across our country, not including our own. We oftentimes feel that, we internalize that very same feeling as if that, we are our own problem in many instances. But getting away from just, this idea of, black on black crime, which we know is really just crimes of proximity, the recent spike in violence in our communities in every city in the capital region, Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. The question out there right now is like, why? Like, why is this happening? Why are we seeing, the violence in the way it is? And then they contrast it up against our call to defund the police, and they're like, and those who are in opposition to that argument are holding up this violence as to be like, this is the reason why we can't defund. We need more police to
Right.
shut it down. And before we, and thinking about that, we've had more and more and more police to the point of them being militarized. That has yet to stop violence in our communities. That has yet to do anything but be reactive to violence in the community. So, I mean, that I think argument is false on its head. But let's get into more about why we're seeing some of the violence happen in our communities. And a couple things I'll point out. One, we are facing a pandemic, a health crisis that has exacerbated all the other issues that were already existing in our communities. That's healthcare, that's jobs, that's housing, that's any sort of treatment or counseling, it's education. All of those things have been not straight. All of those things have been, I think, affected severely in the pandemic, and that's including the closing of programs, closing of
Yeah.
opportunities for our young people to actually do something more besides hanging out in the street. Stress levels are extremely high.
What few programs they had in the first place.
Yeah, are no longer here.
Yeah, they're gone, and that like you said, that additional stress, on top of the constant message of take care of yourself, what's yours is yours, individuality, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, um, and losing the sense of community and working collectively and being together and constantly being at war
Yeah,
in our communities.
yeah. Like this was those were I think feelings that already existed in the community, and like I said a second ago, it's only been exasperated. When you think about the economic stress, we're facing the highest unemployment rate we've seen. We're facing all times of economic stress. We're facing this idea, this fear and tension around whether or not this virus is something that affects me or someone in the family, or is it real, or like we're facing
Mm.
all these different things, and we're in kind of this, I want to say perfect storm, but I'll say horrible storm of events that I think has affected much of the crime spike that we're seeing, or the violence spikes that we're seeing in our community. And it's not just, I think, enough to point to the act of violence and say, oh, it was because he or she was beefing about this or that thing, and then this thing happened.
Right.
Those acts are rooted much deeper than that, right?
Because the first response I've read for almost any police chief in the area is, um, well, we believe that the reason this happened is because there was a conflict between these two groups, or there was an argument
Mm-hmm.
between these two individuals. And let me pause really briefly and say, no one is saying that there's no such thing as individual accountability and responsibility. There is always the both and.
Mm-hmm.
The root cause, the circumstances, the environment, and the individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But police chiefs are quick to the, well, we know that this gang is beefing with that gang, and we think that it was retaliation because of this act. Well, those gangs had always existed in those communities, and there wasn't this level of activity previously. And to your earlier point, we've had nothing but increase after increase after increase of policing in
Mm-hmm.
those same communities. Increase after increase to police budgets. I know Schenectady City Council just had some conversation about receiving additional funding for a gun violence task force to increase its activity that they've not successfully done, you know, previously with all the increases, but let's give them more funding and money. Right.
So I want to add this other point that I think is really interesting that I was reading about this morning. With the increase of like unemployment and the decrease in, I think, all these other activities for our young people to be involved in besides just hanging out in the street, there has been a spike in gun sales across the country. So the availability of guns is at an all-time high, while at the same time, the availability of other community programs, other types of entertainment, other ways in which our young people can get involved and do other things besides pick up a gun are on the rapid decrease. So when we're talking about violence in our communities, I want us all, and that means our community, that means communities outside of here, and then those that are elected uh, to do the job of protecting the community, to understand that it's deeper than just looking at the immediate act. It's deeper than looking at maybe the very second thing or the thing that came just before that. We have to look at all the things that actually affected that act and how that thing came to be. What is in the outgrowth of? And I think that if you're not doing that type of work, you're being really disingenuous, or simply incompetent. And you need to have someone in your office that can actually do the work and think through layers of these events as opposed to just what happened in the moment.
But isn't there also, unfortunately, the status quo? Like this is what
Yeah,
they know.
yeah,
This is society
yeah.
as it is presented, and well, this is just the way things are. Uh, which my friend Tony Gaddy hates that statement. This is how it's always been, so it's how it's always going to be.
Mm-hmm.
This how it's always been and how it's going to be is that violence is the norm. And I feel like we talk about this every week, even when it's not intentional and it's not the topic that we're bringing to the table, but that society, especially American culture, perpetuates violence, including rape culture.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that the victim should dress a certain way so that the perpetrator is not attacking them because they can't control themselves, that these acts of violence and toxic masculinity, that you must be aggressive and fighting is how you prove that you're a man, and that we should be dropping bombs on other countries. That's how we maintain our power. And police show up in our communities with guns and weapons of destruction. Albany gassing communities,
Yeah.
which the mayor still has not, come out and done anything about. Thanks, Kathy Sheehan. Um,
Silence is violence. Kathy
Silence
Sheehan.
is violence. These are the weapons that they put on our communities time and time again, showing up for every reason. No matter what the call is, they show up with a gun, they show up with a taser, they show up with pepper spray. Their first instinct is to interact in a physical and violent way. But big surprise, that's how we show up in our communities, that we are doing the exact same things when we interact with each other, and somehow we're supposed to be different. We're supposed to know better, but protect and serve, that's how you show up.
I mean, we've all been socialized in a particular way in our society, both through through our education system, through mainstream media, and that's like the news, movies, TV shows, etc. Like we've all been socialized in this culture of violence, and especially in this culture of white supremacy
Mm,
that actually has the value structure that places Black and Brown communities at the very bottom of it.
right.
So that kind of education and that kind of, I think, understanding, collective understanding, has an impact already. Then when you put a community through the crisis that it's in right now, that that effect is now on like rocket fuel, right? So it's
Yeah.
exasperated in ways, and it shows up in this way that now is being used in so many different spaces and pointed at as being the reason why our community is wrong and why this message, Black Lives Matter, and what we're actually out here trying to fight for, is problematic. Um, and we're here to dispel all of those notions. But at the same time we do that, I think it's important that we make sure that the work that is happening in the community is uplifted, because it's not
Absolutely.
just us sitting here talking about changing structures and changing policies and addressing those that actually are elected officials that have a lot to say about how our communities are run and that are run and are worked on in the best ways. It's also about the community members getting out there in the streets and getting right in the pockets of violence and talking to young people,
Yeah.
which we're seeing
Yeah.
throughout all the Tri Cities. Like I'm seeing 518 Snug out there. I'm seeing Ceasefire out there. And I see y'all, and we are going to support whatever efforts we can to make sure that the violence in our communities ends in the best way we can. We can do what we can on our end, right? But we still need to be making sure that our communities are properly funded, that our communities are properly cared for, that programs are available, that our young people have things to do besides what we're seeing now, right? And also that they're not criminalized just for the way they look, right? Because that's a part of the problem, right? That's a part of the problem.
You mean when you're standing in front of the corner store, talking to your friends, shooting the shit, talking about, well, not the game anymore. We're not talking about the game last night, but whatever you're talking about, just standing on the street is a criminal act.
Yeah,
Young people being outside, got nothing else to do,
yeah,
is a criminal act.
yeah,
And again, it's the both and. Like, it's so important to have these conversations with young people and with everybody, because it's not just young people. Um, can I get an amen? Uh, Everyone needs to have these conversations. Like, barbershops are open now.
mm-hmm.
Need to have these conversations in the barbershop and in the hair salons. You got your masks on, have a conversation. Um, Out in the community, like you said, 518 Snug and other organizations are out there talking to young people, and bringing up, like I said to someone, if you tell a young person that their acts look like they're policing people and they're acting like cops against their community, I can't imagine that's something they want to do. That they're just going to be like, yeah, I love that I'm acting like a cop right now. No. Um, so those conversations on top of defund the police and put the resources back into our community. So we have more community conversations, we have more community programs, we have the support that communities need to foster those types of community relationships, to support families that are in need, because we live where? In the richest state in the nation, in the richest nation in the world. Hundreds of millionaires and billionaires in this state. They didn't get that money because they worked harder. They stole it from us and they need to give it back. Not a fair taxation. Give back the shit you stole.
Yeah, if you want to put I think a number on it, that's 119 billionaires, an additional 1 million millionaires. So resources, funding is actually there. It's available. This idea that we're somehow we don't have the money, we're living in this scarcity,
Scarcity.
and things are hard. But listen, the pandemic hit. Jobs were lost. Folks in companies lost a lot of money.
Except Jeff Bezos.
That's the narrative. I didn't say it was. It's some
Right.
folks that are on, say, middle class down lost a lot of money, but there's other folks, the other billionaires, the other people that are who are the ultra rich, actually made money. I think it's a total of $77 billion in the last couple of months.
Billion.
Profit.
That was with a B.
Yeah.
With a B. And I don't know. Can we even say middle class anymore? Does that exist? Isn't it really? Because there were people, not to go rabbit hole, but there were people that were considered, oh well, I'm safe in this middle structure, who because of the pandemic had a harsh reality of, oh shit,
Yeah.
that quickly became one and two paychecks away from homelessness or bankruptcy, or just that financial stress, that all of a sudden they're asking questions about where's a food pantry when that was something they had never thought of before.
Yes, one thing this crisis did, it's made a lot of things. I mean, it brought clarity where there had been obfuscation, right? It
Yeah.
brought clarity for a lot of people. The realities that we see on the ground, the crises that we already were suffering, and I'm talking specifically about Black, brown, and impoverished communities that were specifically suffering before the pandemic. And I said this earlier, have only been exasperated, have been brought up and uplifted in a much clearer way, I think, than ever before. Our issues in healthcare, our issues in
Yeah.
housing, our issues in the job market,
Yeah.
right, have been, I think, highlighted in ways that many of us in this generation before had not seen. And it's important that we continue to uplift that and understand, like, so the pandemic didn't cause the crisis, right?
Crisis was already
The
here.
crisis was already here. The pandemic just made, I think, the crisis much more clear for folks.
And worse.
And worse and worse. And that's the clarity that they have. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not as well off as I thought I was. I thought I
Yeah.
was successful and I made it. In actuality, I'm 2 and 3 paychecks away from being destitute. And listen, that's important for that to happen. But back to the community violence, I want to say that this is a both and argument. This is a both and fight. We need to fight this beast of racism and white supremacy in every way it shows up. And I argue oftentimes police brutality, whether it's the police murdering someone, or police abusing someone, or police using their authority in some sort of abusive way,
To
as
cage
well as
them.
community violence enacted on the community itself, are outgrowths of the same thing, are outgrowths of white supremacy, our outgrowths of racism, our outgrowths of poverty, impoverished communities, our outgrowths of this kind of violent culture that we all were brought up in and socialized in. So, I mean, we are going to fight this battle and we're going to uplift these all the work that's happening in the community. Once again, 518 Snug, ceasefire, I see y'all. We need to be more in conversation. I'll be uplifting whatever I can to make sure that that message is getting out. Trust and believe that. And any work happening around the Capital District that's about getting in the streets and talking to them young people and trying to figure out better ways to move forward, to have conflict resolution, to do all of those type of things, I'm there to definitely support. but I'm also going to be in this battle to make sure
we get the resources.
that we get the resources necessary to be effective. Because working within the system and leaving those resources up in the hands of people utilizing it to build casinos, to build roads downtown, to build affordable housing without giving anybody jobs in the community, without hiring, contracting black and brown businesses, we ain't having that. No. We're not having that because that's a part of the problem as well. So we're going to be in the fight doing our thing in all the fronts that we can, and we're going to be supporting all of y'all on the ground doing that work. And I'll show up with y'all too and do it. Because I'm from the hood. I live in all the hoods around here except for Troy. But Troy, I know y'all. I was out there MLK the other day. I see y'all too. You hear me?
Yeah.
So we here.
When we say connected to, right? For those that don't know, it was back March, April, May. We're talking about how all of the cities need to be connected. How all of us need to be in this fight together, because if we can show up for Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, who are states away, how can we not support our brothers, sisters, and non-binary folks who are right next door to us within minutes of a drive? And it's not even 6 degrees of separation. Because when you said, Albany, Schenectady, not Troy, yeah, no, I'm claiming everybody. My grandmother lived on Sheridan in Albany. I was born and raised in Schenectady. I got hella family that was in Troy, on our way to Hoosick Falls. And, everybody goes up to Saratoga for the summer. So, it is all connected. We're not that far away from each other. And when we are united, it is scary as shit for those in power, because then they can't stop us, which is what we're seeing right now. And talking about the different systems and structures and ways that they show up, and the need to make sure that resources are allocated to our communities and not to the same systems and structures of oppression and exploitation. Anybody hear about a task force in Albany, Schenectady, Troy? Maybe you happen to hear that the governor put an executive order in place which said localities must have community conversations to find the solutions that fit their communities to reform policing. Reform's not a good enough word, but that's what well-meaning liberals use. Transform would be a better word. And he made that statement after we were already doing that. We had already started and had been having community conversations across the greater capital region, which is what the 13 demands came out of, those conversations about transforming not just policing, but the justice system overall, including county sheriffs, the DA's office, and local police. And so now, localities, mayors in each city are supposed to come up with a plan based on conversations in the community that will transform policing. Because if they don't, the governor's going to take away their money. If he took their money, my question is, where's he going to put it? Be great if he fully funded schools. Another rabbit hole. I don't like the governor. I don't think he likes me either. But each mayor, Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Saratoga, have started to create task force. Some are further along in the process than others, is my understanding. All of them are making decisions for communities without community input off the bat. Straight up. Just steamrolling through. Whole bunch of white men and women who are saying, I know who to pick. I know who's the best choice for this. And I know how these conversations should be structured. And I know who to reach out to. And I'm going to also reach out to third-party consultants to design the questions for these community conversations, because that makes a lot of fucking sense. I'm a little annoyed.
I mean, and you should be, and I think we all should be annoyed. It's so from my perspective, I feel like all the reasons why we come out to fight and protest and rally and scream and yell for change is showing up right now in a very real way, right? Because, like I said, it's not just about the outgrowth of police brutality, even though that's traumatic, right, and painful to see on Facebook Live, TV, whatever, where you're seeing it.
Yeah.
There's all these other things that lead up to it that are part and parcel to that outgrowth. And one of those things is this idea that we know best as elected officials. I mean, as police chiefs, as captains of the guard, that we know best for what should happen in the community. We know best what questions should be asked. We know best who to ask. And if you started, and this is for all the local city officials in all the areas in the capital region, Saratoga, Albany, Troy, and wherever, if you started off your task force without first speaking with the community or having some sort of community forum and asking who the community wanted at the table to be involved, like you started off on the wrong foot. You started off in that same space, in that same, I want to see, arrogant space to
Yeah.
think that without consulting anyone, because
No.
this the reason why the reforms and stuff are happening is because the community came out and demanded it, right? Not because you just decided one day.
Yeah.
Because if you knew what you were doing, if you knew what the community wanted, these things would have been happened. But because the community came out and demanded change,
Yep.
right? That's why that's why this is the reaction to that.
Yeah.
And to continue to, I think, rely on this, this kind of idea that you know best, I think is really, really problematic. And it's continuing to show up, and it's showing up in every community. Like, this isn't just Schenectady. It isn't just Troy. It ain't just Albany and Saratoga. Like, it's showing up throughout the state and throughout our country. And I think that it's our obligation, me and Jamaica Miles specifically, to continue to uplift these narratives, uplift these issues so that the community can see and judge for themselves. Because if you're not paying attention closely, like, we are going to get this. So I say this a lot.
Yep.
And it's I think it's true that if we continue to do the same thing, we're going to continue to get the same results. We've tried this time and time and time again. Why aren't we learning from our history? Let's get the community involved. Let's get the community at the table. Let's allow the community to lead.
Yeah.
Right? And the changes that are going to happen in the community. And there's ways of doing that that we're not seeing now. And I feel like us getting in the community and having these conversations and I think addressing what we did with the 13 demands with a lot of our community folks.
Yep.
And having these conversations and then learning more. Because remember,
Absolutely.
the 13 demands were a short list.
Starting point.
It was a short list that we got from the community. It
Yep.
wasn't the whole list.
No, it wasn't even everything that we heard.
Yes.
Like, we did. Oh no, we took some liberties to say, okay, of all of the things that we heard, how can we condense it down to a starting point? Because there was a lot more. And we've received feedback since then. Because there are people that say, hey, are you addressing the school to prison pipeline? Or what about, sex work is real work? Like, there were lots of other pieces in there that we say, yes, keep giving us feedback. We collect it all. There's countless notes, both digitally and on pieces of paper, that we refer to often, because we actually listen to the people most impacted. And to Shawn's point about why there is a task force in any city to begin with, is because millions of people showed up in the streets across New York State demanding a change to policing. It's not because the governor's a genius and altruistic and felt like, oh my gosh, I really see it now. I now, in this moment, as Andrew Cuomo, this white man who ain't never gave a shit about nobody but himself and the money in his pocket, I all of a sudden, through my capitalistic view, know that Black and brown people are suffering under policing and there has to be a change, and I'm going to make sure it happens. I'm going to tell them to have community conversations and create change, or I'll take their money because capitalism. No. Andrew, if you're watching, we all know that this wasn't because of your altruistic behaviors and your love for Black and brown folks. It's because you didn't have a choice. To the mayors in all the cities and the officials and localities across the state, especially the greater capital region, we're watching, we're going to hold you accountable, and it's not going to be your decision about how things need to go. It's going to be ours. The communities in every single city and locality will have their voices heard, and you're going to do what they said, whether you like it or not. I like my little PSAs that just happen to.
Listen, well said, well said. And I, on some of the harder points of the community involvement and the community's reasons why we're at this point here, the community is going to be, the community should be the reason for any policy change
Mm-hmm.
that we see moving forward.
Yeah.
Right? We have a lot going on. This is not an easy fight. These are not easy questions. I think to wrestle with. We do our best here on these Monday mornings to kind of uplift some of these conflicts. I mean, the conflict. I mean, it's a very real. I think truth to have like this battle in your mind about what do we do with police brutality? What do we do with community violence? What do we do with this idea of defunding or funding the police? And that's our job, right? I take to it like I like anything else I love. I want to uplift this so that we can have these conversations. And I'm hoping that you all take these conversations when you're done listening to us,
Yeah.
take them into your own lives and have these conversations, and then come up with, I think, ways to address them, because it's not enough to wrestle with this stuff.
Right. Don't just complain about the
Yeah.
problem. What are the solutions? And communities have ideas about solutions.
Mhm.
They just need the space and opportunity to share them and for them to be uplifted and then implemented. Because the best made plans we've seen in our state and in localities say things like, oh, we're going to ban knee to neck holds. So, what are you doing to ensure it's implemented in a way that it never happens again? Because we haven't seen that yet. Or when there's something as simple as a ban on all chokeholds, all strangleholds, and all hog ties, that there's pushback on that as if, well, no, we can't do that. We need to wait and have a conversation about it. Like, people have been in the streets screaming about this, but we need a conversation because elected officials don't do anything they should do unless they're made to. And when we're not paying attention and we're not showing up and we're not having conversations with other people and lifting up voices, they just stick to the status quo that keeps them in power and keeps us oppressed and exploited, fighting for scraps with each other instead of directing our energy to those that are actually the cause of our pain.
And a lot of the idea that you just brought up of like, so for instance, a good idea is a good idea, right? What makes sense, is what makes sense. Um, the reasons behind why someone would deny that truth, I mean, I may be many, but a lot of it is rooted in control and it's rooted in power, because it's not enough. I think to say, you know what, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that. Right? That's great. Thank you for getting that stuff from the community and then bringing it to us because we think you're right. That makes sense. Wait a minute. If you do that, you're now giving up something that is, I think, so valuable that it offends the entire power structure, and that is power itself. You're now sharing in this kind of, you're now sharing and working in community in a way that you have not previously done. And that's an affront to the way the system is set up. So policing, as it is now constituted, is a power structure that reinforces itself, and this does not lend itself to sharing, and it does not lend itself to being told what it should or should not do. And then having the police, as they are now, deciding having your hand in who is on a task force and who is not on a task force to address police reform, I think anyone with any common sense would say that's really, really problematic and scary. Because why would someone trust that the police could police themselves in a way that'll be really, really effective in the community? It's disingenuous, and I think highlights for many of us the problems with the structure itself. It cannot police itself. It should not want to police itself, because if it was being genuine, and wanting to have real change and being effective in community, it would listen to the community who's been out here talking to them and yelling and screaming about why change needs to happen. And they're not really trying to do that. They're trying to find those, and this is no shade on anyone who's on a task force right now.
Yeah.
You may be involved. This is not on you. This is just about the process itself, and the process being a part of the problematic structure that we're all facing.
And to those that are on any of the task force, sending you positive energy and strength and light to try to maneuver through the bureaucracy and bullshit and the power structures that are in place inside those rooms and those conversations, as well as recognize the people who are at the head of the table, mayors and police chiefs, are involved in these processes. They are leading the conversations. They didn't think there was anything fucking wrong in the first place. They didn't think there was a problem and continue to push back and say, oh, no, 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 we don't need to do that. Or now they're saying we need to hear from the community ourselves before we make any changes. But they make changes to laws, policies, and practices all the damn time without asking us. All the time, in secrecy, and behind doors, and oh wait, city council meetings, they have to allow for open conversation, and not during COVID because city council meetings are now online and there is no actual interaction with our city council members. Um, we'll see how tonight goes. Schenectady City Council meeting. If you get a chance, make sure that you watch it. Starts at 5:30. It's on YouTube. We'll see if we can hear them this week because we couldn't hear them 2 weeks ago. They make decisions about our lives without our consent or conversation constantly. But the second we demand it, we say, you need to listen to us because we know about our lives better than you do. They say, oh, wait, but do all of you feel that way? Let's go talk to the people that already agree with us and have been our friends this whole time and only listen to them. We're going to handpick which people we talk to from the community and who are the representatives. And we're still going to hold space in patriarchal white supremacy kind of ways, where white men are leading conversations and marginalized voices are silenced and not giving access or opportunity and not given equity. Saying that there's one person from each community in a room is not how something should happen when some of those people have already had access and opportunity and others were never listened to. Equity, not equality. There should be more voices in the room that are impacted and marginalized and have direct experience than those that were already at the table. Because you know what they're going to say. But you've not heard from those other voices, especially those that are already in the streets. Can you imagine if there were formerly incarcerated people and sex workers and youthful offenders that were at the table talking about police reform? And there were more of those voices at the table about their experiences and the families of people who are currently incarcerated and what they went through in that process at the table, talking about what change is needed. Revolutionary. Revolutionary. So are you an elected official or city official who's revolutionary, or are you here for the status quo? Which one? Let me know.
Remember, the status quo is about holding on to power. The status quo is about holding on to the ways in which you've always done things, which is another way of saying holding on to power.
Yep.
So, bringing folks in the room who have historically not had power, not been shared in the conversation, is a type of giving up of power, and that's people are not willing, I think, to do that. And then it's the value. Then it's a value system, and it's about worth. It's about who should be at the table versus who shouldn't. And that is, and if you're determining who shouldn't, you're also determining who's valuable and who's not.
Worthy. Right?
Who's
Who's
not worthy?
worthy?
Who's not worthy? And we get a lot of that. So you talked about two, I think, youthful offenders and those who have committed crimes and have felonies and etc. Those people are easily for all populations devalued, discarded, and considered unvaluable, despite all the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding they may have about the systems and structures, despite being those most directly impacted by the systems that we all mostly now claim have some serious, serious flaws, and we need to actually tear down and recreate in some other way that's actually beneficial to the entire community. This idea of value and worth is rooted historically in what? Racism and white supremacy. It's a way that the structure has, I think, existed for so long, has continued to reinforce itself, and it's our duty, once again, to uplift it. I have already been called out. Many of us have been called out for being, oh, well, you've committed crimes in the past, so how dare you now have, be someone that's calling for justice? I say, how dare I not? How dare I not? If I have been a person that has been a part of, say, harm in the community, have I been a person that has learned from where I've been, has climbed this mountain of understanding to get to the place I am today, and I'm very happy with the person I am today. Why would I not be at the table having this conversation, having this discussion, if I see the structures, if I see the way in which my community has impacted, the way myself, my family, friends, and loved ones have also been impacted? Why wouldn't I want to be at the table having the conversation? Why would I not be valued at the table having this conversation? And I think that, once again, I use this word a lot, disingenuous. It's disingenuous to say I shouldn't be. Because if at
Yeah.
the one hand you say you uphold this sense of justice and this sense of right, why wouldn't you hold that up for me as well? Am I not a part of the community? Are those that have uh, committed crimes or been incarcerated, whether they're young or old, are they no longer valuable people? Should they, for a lifetime, not have an opportunity to speak out in this way, to be in the fight to bring fairness, justice, equity to the community? And if you would marginalize them and keep them away, what is that saying about you? I never worry about what people say about me so much. I worry about who I am and how I show up. Because you can say what you want, but I am who I am, and I have the strength to do that. But not everyone has that. Not everyone has that. Not everyone has that. And it's important that I sit here and I speak for them as well. And I tell them that, yo, y'all have a voice too. Y'all come to this fight in the same way I did. Y'all are valuable. It is important that you are here. Your voices are valuable. It will take all of us in this community. And that means those behind the wall. That means those out here. That means all black, all white, Asian, whoever, however you identify. Generally, like, it takes all of us to bring this community together, to create the community that we want. Anyone telling you something different is what?
Perpetuating white supremacy.
Perpetuating white supremacy.
And it's why we have to pay attention to what's happening. How are task force forming? Where are they meeting? Who's holding them accountable? By the way, it has to be the individuals from the community. Who's on civilian police review boards? What is the process of the civilian police review board? When you make a complaint against officers, what happens then? Oh, it goes to cops first before it goes to civilian police review board. So there are cops looking at your complaint before it actually goes to them, as opposed to it going to them, or that there has to be a complaint when there is an act of violence or harm involving an officer. Why isn't it simply, which is part of our 13 demands, that when there is an interaction of violence that causes harm involving an officer and an individual, regardless of the level of harm, like they shouldn't have to die for there to be an investigation, that information should automatically go to at least the Civilian Police Review Board, which should be community members. And then that transparency should include automatically the history of that officer. Thank goodness for 50A being repealed. But it should be automatic, not something you have to request. Like, it should be automatic, and the power for that Civilian Police Review Board to push it forward to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General having more responsibility in that process, and not an internal investigation. Because police officers can tell me all the time, oh, well, the internal review process, cops don't like them. I'm not here for it. If it is not an outside investigation, I'm not here for it, because the whole system is already tainted and biased towards protecting officers no matter what they do, period. We need to pay attention to the task force, civilian review boards, our city council, our mayors, and townships and villages, and the policies and processes and what they do. Police car just rolled by. Um, because if we don't hold them accountable, it is business as usual. It is the status quo, and then we're just still hurt and harmed and struggling to survive with no opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, and we're not going for that.
We're
I
not.
think that this moment in our history, understand where we are, understand that this is, I think, different in a lot of ways. There's a lot of similarities. I love history. There's a lot of similarities to other movements that have happened in our world, in America specifically. But this is something that I think is that has a dynamic that is a little bit different. The youth in this generation are really, really standing up in ways that we haven't necessarily seen before. I think this is something that will remain sustainable as long as we continue to uplift this, as long as we continue to put pressure on the elected officials to do the things that we want them to do. We put pressure on ourselves because, once again, this is about showing up. This is about getting uncomfortable. This is about doing more
Black
than what
August.
you've always done. This is Black August still. This Black August. If you guys weren't there or show up in Townsend Park, is a month in which we are uplifting the political prisoner, the freedom fighter, the revolutionary, those that in our history have always fought for Black and brown liberation. And this fight continues on, and we're here as a part of that fight in this generation to hold up that flag, Black Lives Matter, to continue to push these issues and uplift them so that the community can continue to be aware of what's going on, and that they have involvement, they recognize that their voice is powerful. I saw someone in the chat put something up about voting. Voting, yes, is super important. Having our own officials running for office is super important. But simply getting involved,
Yeah.
right? Simply having the conversations with your neighbors, having conversations with your family, having conversations in the community, those are the beginning steps for the change that we need. Coming out and sharing, listening to our live, creating your own platforms, doing whatever you need to do to continue to fight. Because if we go silent, if we go dark, this fight in our community goes dark. We need to continue uplifting these stories, continue to get in the street, and understand that this thing has happened in a cycle. There was an arch. There was thousands and thousands of people out here in the streets. Now it's time to pivot. Not to say we ain't gonna be in the streets, because you're gonna see us there, but that we begin to pivot, I think, into other ways to be effective, other ways of communicating with each other.
And we cannot afford to wait for the next crisis to do this all over again, because this isn't the only time we've had a crisis. And so when we're here talking about community violence and policing and these task force, it is part of the ongoing struggle, especially during Black August, the unity, the resistance, the self-discipline, and the political education to learn from our past to move us toward our future. Each one of us has an access and opportunity to be involved in a way that is unique to each of us, to be a part of all of us, to create the change and live in the world that we all deserve and are all worthy of. We are like over on time.
Yeah, we're over on time.
Over on time. Not a big surprise. This is what we do.
Yeah.
We get excited. We get in the moment.
Community violence, policing,
task force. They're all connected. I hope, if nothing else, when we have these conversations and we have them with these different topics, that people start to see that there is a thread that comes through in each conversation, but also through all of them, where everything is connected. We don't have to talk about homelessness and education and healthcare. When we talk about these things, those things are also relevant and part of the conversation, because you could put any of those topics into the conversation and end up in the same place, that we have a need for the support and direct service that is happening in our communities on all of those issues. We also need systemic and structural change on all of those issues. We also need all of us united together, demanding change and justice in our local communities and across the state, or we're stuck in that perpetual cycle of white supremacy. I mean, if you're down with white supremacy and you like the patriarchy, then I guess you're good. But for the rest of us, fuck that. I'm not having it.
Nah, we're not having it. And if your system of reality is one in which you don't get it, I ask that you, if you're on this, if you're looking at this live, expose yourself to something different, because you're not gonna have my lived experience. You're not gonna see, if you're not from the communities I'm from, if you're not black or brown and been there. That doesn't mean that that empathy isn't a real thing. That when we're out here to deny what we're doing on the basis of somehow us being delusional about our life, or you know what I mean, or just our imaginations running wild, when
Yeah.
the evidence of what we are talking about has shown up live and direct in all kind of media platforms. I think it's important that if you question what we're doing, that you don't just question in your mind and then then work against it, but expose yourself to something different. Expose yourself to the possibility that your society is inherently unequal. I would even say, and it's difficult for me to say it in that way, because at this point I feel like we've had so many different outgrowths of what we know to be racism and white supremacy, that it's very hard for me to imagine that there's folks out here right now who don't get it, who don't kind of understand that it's a problem, and that's a willful ignorance that I do not have patience for, and I won't waste my time always trying to talk about. But there is something called a system of reality that's based on a reference point that we all kind of walk in and come from. Mine has told me and showed me that this society is inherently racist, and on so many different levels. And it shows up in every statistic that you want to talk about when we're talking about quality. But I guess this is a conversation for another time. So I feel
It
like I'm
is.
about to go.
He
I'm about
is.
to go on and on
A-
and on
and
about it.
and then I have like other things where like I'm like, oh, can I push back with love even though I'm not disagreeing with you? That, like you said, we were all raised in these same systems and structures to believe these things. White supremacy isn't for white people either. What's Michaela Love that I say? How many of you are 3 paychecks away from being a millionaire? You're not. You're not. These systems and structures are not helping you either. Like I said, I've got family in Hoosick Falls, and the environmental disasters that they faced in a majority white community, because white supremacy and capitalism don't fucking care about you either. This is why it's all of us.
This is why it's all of us.
That's why it's all of
Let me
us.
shout out to Stacy, who I see you on there. You said, yeah, we need to demand transparency. Right, we do need to demand transparency.
Yeah.
We also need to demand that those in the community, those that have been out here, those that have listened, questioned, and have the ear of the community, be at those tables in those conversations as well. And until we have that, I think that a lot of these task force they're harkening back to the same old thing, the same old status quo. This
Yeah.
is an appeasement
Yeah.
move, and policy change is not the end all be all of the issues that we see in our community.
Nope.
But I know we got to wrap up.
Yeah, right.
Been a
We've
long
been saying
time.
that for like 7 minutes. We're gonna wrap up and then we're gonna
Yeah.
talk about something else. Again, if there is anything that is a topic that you want us to discuss, there are comments that you have, you can either put them in the comment section. We do check. You can send us a message on Facebook. You can email us at untitledandfree@gmail.com. There are lots of ways to be involved, lots of ways for your voice to be heard, and ways to support us so that we are touching on all the topics that are necessary, because we don't know everything. We're continuing to learn as we go as well. And we appreciate having the access and opportunity and space to do this work. So everyone, be safe, stay well, and wear your mask. COVID's still real, and we'll see what we talk about next Monday.
Next Monday.
Next Monday.
Bye, y'all.
Laters. I'm supposed to say laters.
Oh, later. Peace.